In the world of bodybuilding, few rivalries have shaped the sport like Ronnie Coleman and Dorian Yates. Two men, two eras, one throne. For years, fans debated who truly wore the crown of the greatest bodybuilder alive. Now, after decades of silence, Ronnie Coleman finally breaks his silence about Dorian Yates. Stay tuned, because before we dive into what Ronnie just revealed, let's take a look at both men's journeys, how they rose from nothing to become legends of iron. Early life of Ronnie Coleman. Ronnie Dean Coleman was born on May 13, 1964 in Monroe, Louisiana. Raised in a humble home by his mother, Jessie Benton, Ronnie's early life was anything but easy. Money was tight, meals were simple, but the lessons of discipline and hard work were forged early. After graduating from Grambling State University with honors in accounting, Ronnie's dreams were modest. He just wanted a steady job. When that didn't happen, he joined the Arlington Police Department. Ironically, it was there in the small police gym that destiny found him. His fellow officer Gustavo Arlada noticed Ronnie's freakish strength and introduced him to Metroflex Gym and owner Brian Dobson. Dobson saw something special. He offered Ronnie a lifetime gym membership if he competed in a bodybuilding show. Ronnie agreed reluctantly. That decision changed his life forever. He trained like a man possessed, and in 1990 he won the Mr. Texas competition, defeating Dobson himself. But it wasn't fame yet. For years, Ronnie struggled, competing, failing, and returning to his police shifts after long nights at the gym. He was broke, he was exhausted, but he never stopped. By the late 90s, his physique had transformed into something almost supernatural, massive, shredded, and symmetrical. In 1998, the world finally took notice. Ronnie Coleman, the humble cop from Louisiana, became Mr. Olympia, and with that victory, he began one of the most dominant reigns in bodybuilding history. The rise of Dorian Yates. Before Ronnie ruled the stage, another shadow loomed large. Dorian Andrew Meintjes Yates, born April 1962 in Staffordshire, England. His early years were marked by rebellion and tragedy. After his father passed away when Dorian was 13, he drifted into trouble, eventually landing time in a youth detention center. But inside those walls, something shifted. He discovered discipline. Strength training became his salvation. By the mid-1980s, Dorian was a man on a mission, training in the now famous Temple Gym in Birmingham. He forged a new philosophy: blood and guts. No glamour, no smiles, just pure intensity. Heavy duty, to failure, every set, every time. That brutal style turned him into a monster. In 1992, he won his first Mr. Olympia, and for the next 6 years, nobody could touch him. Dorian was unstoppable. Granite hard, grainy, and dense. His physique looked like it was carved from stone. He didn't talk much. He didn't party. He just trained. Alone. In the dark. Fans called him the Shadow. And rightly so. He appeared on stage, won, and disappeared back into the shadows. The transition of power. By 1997, bodybuilding stood on the edge of a new era. The sport had grown darker, harder, and more extreme under the rule of Dorian Yates. For 6 straight years, his dominance had been absolute. His physique dense, grainy, and unmatched in sheer conditioning. But behind the victories lay a body that was breaking down. Years of relentless punishment had left deep scars. His biceps and triceps were torn, his joints inflamed, and his body bled internally from the brutal training sessions that had become his signature. That year, he stepped on the Olympia stage for what would unknowingly become his final stand. Even with visible injuries, he maintained an aura of control and intimidation, winning his 6th consecutive Sandow through sheer grit. It was a victory born more from will than from muscle. Shortly after, he walked away from the stage for good. The sport's most intimidating champion had left the throne vacant. But bodybuilding does not rest. It evolves. And from the vacuum left behind, a new force began to rise. In the gyms of Texas, a former police officer named Ronnie Coleman was quietly training with a level of ferocity the sport had never witnessed. While others enjoyed the spotlight, Ronnie was buried in Metroflex Gym, deadlifting weights that bent bars and squatting until the room spun. In 1998, the world finally saw what that pain had built. When Ronnie stepped onto the Olympia stage, the crowd didn't just see a competitor, they saw an event. He outmuscled every favorite, including Flex Wheeler and Kevin Levrone, with a combination of size, symmetry, and conditioning that felt almost alien. His physique wasn't just enormous, it was alive, vibrant, and full of movement. That night, a new standard was born. Where Yates had ruled through stoic dominance, Coleman ruled through passion and power. His smile on stage contrasted Yates's cold focus, and fans immediately noticed the shift. Bodybuilding had gone from the shadows of blood and guts to the thunder of lightweight, baby. Coleman's victory didn't just end an era, it redefined the future. Suddenly, everyone was chasing his kind of mass, his kind of energy, his kind of spirit. But with it came the great debate. Had Ronnie Coleman evolved the foundation Dorian built, or had he completely rewritten it? The rivalry and mutual respect. Though Ronnie Coleman and Dorian Yates never stood side by side under the same Olympia lights, their names became inseparable. Fans, analysts, and even fellow competitors couldn't resist the comparison. They represented two philosophies of greatness, two polar forces that defined the modern bodybuilding era. Dorian was the tactician. His entire persona revolved around discipline and control. He trained in darkness, spoke with precision, and treated bodybuilding as a science. Every rep had purpose, every meal had measurement, and every appearance carried authority. His approach was cold, methodical, and unshakably focused, a master strategist dissecting his own body into perfection. Ronnie, on the other hand, was the embodiment of raw, infectious energy. Where Dorian was quiet and calculating, Ronnie was loud and unfiltered, a force of nature who turned pain into joy. He trained like a man possessed, shouting his way through record-breaking lifts, smiling between sets that would cripple most men. His approach was more instinctive, almost spiritual, driven by faith, passion, and a belief that strength came from something bigger than muscle alone. Two opposites, two kings, one throne. The bodybuilding world often framed their legacies as rivals, the stoic British Storm versus the blazing Texan Hurricane. When Yates retired, his dominance still echoed through the sport, and many believed Coleman had simply inherited his empire rather than built his own. That narrative created friction in the fanbase and speculation in the media. In interviews, Yates was sometimes portrayed as skeptical of the post-90s direction of the sport, the era of unprecedented size and fullness that Coleman came to symbolize. To some, it sounded like disapproval. But beneath the surface, there was something deeper than rivalry. Ronnie Coleman rarely spoke of Yates publicly during his reign. He didn't need to. He knew what Dorian had accomplished, and in his own way, he respected it deeply. For Ronnie, Yates represented the blueprint, the standard of obsession and professionalism that every true champion had to surpass. Coleman studied Yates's training tapes, his blood and guts philosophy, and his mental toughness. He viewed Yates not as a competitor, but as the wall he had to climb to reach immortality. Each heavy lift, each grueling session in the Texas heat was his way of honoring and outpacing that legacy. When Coleman finally opened up, he didn't speak like a rival recounting a feud. He spoke like a student acknowledging a teacher. He credited Yates with transforming bodybuilding from showmanship into warfare, from aesthetics into endurance. He admitted that watching Dorian in his prime reshaped his own definition of what it meant to suffer for greatness. Yates, in turn, has always recognized Coleman's reign as an evolution of his own philosophy. In his view, Ronnie carried the heavy-duty torch into a new age, maintaining the same work ethic but amplifying it with a different kind of intensity and charisma. Where Yates represented precision, Ronnie embodied power. One engineered fear, the other inspired awe. Their methods were different, but their mission was identical: push the human body beyond imagination. Over time, admiration replaced comparison. They became symbols of two distinct but equally sacred paths to greatness, one built in silence, the other in sound. Despite the myths of rivalry, what ultimately connected them was respect, the kind forged only through shared suffering. Both men knew what it meant to give everything to a dream, to break bones and tear muscle in pursuit of perfection. And in that understanding, they were never enemies. They were reflections of the same unbreakable spirit. Behind the Iron Curtain, off stage, beyond the blinding stage lights and roaring crowds, the relationship between Ronnie Coleman and Dorian Yates took on a quieter, more human form. There were no rival speeches, no hidden feuds, no battles for headlines, just mutual recognition between two men who had walked the same punishing road. They crossed paths occasionally at bodybuilding expos, interviews, and Hall of Fame events. Whenever they met, the interaction wasn't about competition or ego. It was about shared experience. They had both lived the same extremes: early mornings, endless meals, aching joints, and the silent war against fatigue. Each saw in the other a mirror of his own sacrifices. There was no need for words. In that world, respect isn't spoken. It's understood. Both had paid a steep price for their place at the top. Ronnie's body, once a symbol of unstoppable strength, now carries the evidence of that pursuit. Multiple spinal surgeries, titanium rods, and constant pain that accompanies even the simplest movements. He moves slower now, with crutches, but with a smile that refuses to fade. To him, every scar is a receipt for the life he chose, the proof that he gave everything. Dorian's body tells a similar story. Torn biceps, shredded triceps, chronic joint pain, his own trophies of endurance. Years of heavy-duty training in the dark corners of Temple Gym left his muscles chiseled, but his tendons frayed. Even after retirement, his physique bore the reminders of what it means to push past human limits. But like Ronnie, Dorian carries those wounds not as regrets, but as emblems of authenticity. Both men have come to embody the cost of greatness, the part fans never see when the lights go down. Behind every flex, there's pain. Behind every title, there's loss. Over time, Coleman has come to view that cost with acceptance rather than bitterness. In his reflections, he often frames it as the unavoidable toll for leaving a mark on history. For him, legacy demands sacrifice. And if that means living with pain, he considers it a fair exchange for immortality. He also sees Dorian's journey as a lesson in isolation and discipline. The idea that greatness is built in silence, away from applause. Dorian's solitude inside Temple Gym, his refusal to be distracted, and his monastic focus became the foundation that Coleman later expanded upon in his own way. Ronnie took that blueprint and added emotion, noise, and faith, transforming the quiet struggle into a visible celebration of strength. Yates represented the philosophy of restraint. Coleman represented release. Yet at their core, both paths led to the same truth. Greatness demands everything. Their lives, though different in rhythm, beat to the same purpose, to prove that the human will, when combined with obsession, can build monuments of flesh and iron. Today, when Ronnie speaks about Dorian, there's a tone of reverence. He doesn't see a rival from another era. He sees a kindred spirit. Someone who understood the loneliness of chasing perfection. Someone who knew what it meant to keep training long after the cameras stopped rolling. And for both men, the shared pain is not a tragedy. It's a bond. The scars, the surgeries, the sleepless nights, these are the threads that tie their legacies together behind the Iron Curtain, where champions are made long before the world ever notices. When Ronnie Coleman finally chose to speak openly about Dorian Yates, it wasn't with rivalry in his voice, it was with reflection. For years, fans had debated who was greater, who trained harder, who truly defined the era of mass monsters. But in his recent reflections, Coleman dismantled the idea of competition between them. He didn't see Yates as an opponent. He saw him as a spark, a standard, a necessary predecessor whose intensity ignited his own. For the first time, Coleman clearly positioned Yates not as an adversary, but as a catalyst, a man whose approach to bodybuilding changed the culture entirely. He credited Yates with bringing a new level of seriousness to the sport in the 1990s, the diet precision, the mental discipline, and the total commitment to the craft that separated contenders from champions. Before Yates, bodybuilding still carried some remnants of showmanship and flash. After him, it became war. Coleman admitted that watching Yates in his prime altered his perspective on what hard work really meant. At that time, Ronnie was still balancing his life as a police officer, training between shifts, competing mostly for passion rather than fame. But when he saw what Yates was doing, training in cold underground gyms until his muscles tore and his body screamed, something clicked. He realized that his own effort, as immense as it seemed, could go further. Yates had shown that greatness required a level of suffering most people would never endure. That realization became fuel. It transformed Metroflex Gym into a furnace of obsession. Coleman took the same foundation of intensity and turned it into something even more extreme. He added volume, explosiveness, and joy. Where Yates trained in silence, Ronnie roared through pain, yelling "Yeah, buddy" and "Lightweight baby," as if to prove that the work could also be ecstatic. His energy was the opposite of Yates' stoicism. Yet both men were driven by the same unrelenting engine, perfection at any cost. Coleman now speaks of their eras not as conflicting forces, but as chapters in a single story. Yates, he says, built the mold. The idea that bodybuilding was a test of willpower as much as muscle. Coleman simply stretched that mold to its breaking point, showing how far the human body could be pushed when strength met spirit. To him, the lineage is clear. Yates introduced the philosophy of total focus and isolation, while Coleman amplified it with physical extremes that bordered on the impossible. The two weren't opposites. They were evolution in motion, each building upon the other's foundation. Coleman's reflection on Yates carries no trace of competition, only gratitude. He recognizes that without the shadow Dorian cast in the 1990s, there would have been no fire for him to chase. Every heavy squat, every rep that pushed past failure, every night spent dragging himself out of Metroflex exhausted and bleeding, all of it in some way was inspired by Yates. When Coleman finally broke his silence, it wasn't to claim superiority, it was to acknowledge the truth. Dorian Yates didn't just dominate the 1990s, he defined what dominance meant, and it was that definition that allowed Ronnie Coleman to become the force that followed. In his eyes, Dorian was the foundation, he was the extension. One built the fortress, the other raised the flag on top. Together they reshaped bodybuilding's meaning, transforming it from performance into pilgrimage. Today, both men carry scars, physical and emotional, that tell the true story of bodybuilding. Ronnie walks with crutches after multiple spine surgeries. Dorian moves with caution, his once broken body a reminder of relentless years under iron. But both still stand tall in spirit. They've gone from competitors to survivors, from icons to mentors. Dorian now teaches holistic health and spiritual balance. Ronnie travels the world giving motivational talks, reminding everyone that greatness always comes with a price. And in the end, what remains is mutual respect. Two warriors who shaped each other's destinies. Coleman's final assessment of their connection is simple. Yates made him better. He regards Yates as a rival only in the sporting sense and as a brother in the deeper fraternity of those who paid the full price to climb the same mountain. The story of Ronnie Coleman and Dorian Yates isn't just about muscles or trophies. It's about humanity. It's about two men who pushed each other beyond limits, lost nearly everything, yet gained immortality. Their rivalry built legends. Their pain built legacy. If you enjoyed this story, like and subscribe, and click the next video to discover more untold truths behind bodybuilding's greatest icons.